So Susan Collins, the Maine senator who's the darling of moderates, is sponsoring a change in the Electoral Count Act, claiming that it would avoid some of the problems that we had on January 6th. Although, from everything I've seen, she might be misguided on that point. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. If you share my concerns, maybe you could like this video and subscribe to this channel, maybe even click that little bell that will notify you when I post something new. So I find myself in kind of a weird position here. On the one hand, I am a progressive Democrat who, frankly, supports just about everything in the AOC agenda, for example. On the other hand, a mainstream Democrat, because I believe that for us to be able to accomplish any of the agenda, we need to win first. And I'd much rather that we win and get half of what we want than that we lose and not only get none of what we want, but actually get pushed backwards. Frankly, this is an argument that I've been making with progressives since, I was in college. A long time ago. I don't want to tell you how long ago that was. And as a result, I've been accused of being a moderate. Essentially, they've accused me of being the type of person who Martin Luther King wrote about in 1967 when he wrote, "Most whites in America, including many of goodwill, proceed from the premise that equality is a loose expression for improvement. White America is not even psychologically organized to close the gap, essentially. It seeks only to make it less painful and less obvious, but in most respects retain it." Well, I'd like to think of myself as someone who is firmly opposed to racism and really does want to change the system so that we do have equality here in America. But I can see where people on the left, and particularly black activists, get frustrated with the slow pace of progress we have in America. What's more is I can totally understand the urgency that they feel, given the fact that black men are out there being stopped by police and literally killed by them on the streets. This is not the type of crisis that we can just kind of sit back and wait, because every day that this racist society is allowed to continue on, literally black lives are being destroyed. So where does that leave us all right now? Well, I don't want to be one to cast aspersions and try to claim some kind of perfection for myself, because I'll be the first to admit that I'm not perfect and I'm always learning. But I can tell you that I make an effort. I'm always trying to move things in the right direction, always listening to input from people who I may disagree with, but trying to learn from their perspective on things. As a result, I'm willing to embrace certain changes which many of the so-called moderates are not comfortable with, supposedly. We saw that in painful detail play out with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin refusing to change the filibuster rule so that we could address the voting rights that are being taken away from people in one state after another. And now we're seeing it again with Susan Collins, that darling of the moderates from Maine, who's refusing now to even say if she'd vote for Donald Trump or not in 2024, but who has consistently positioned herself as being this moderate who refuses to take sides one way or another. Well, I don't buy that positioning, but let's just accept it for a moment. And part of the way that she's positioning herself as being a moderate is by her advocacy for reform of the Electoral Count Act. Well, the Electoral Count Act, for those of you who aren't aware, is the piece of legislation that essentially says the vice president oversees the House of Representatives as it essentially approves the election of the president. Essentially accepts the ballots of electors from the different states and the way they voted for their different presidential choice. As a result of these, frankly, flawed claims by some of the MAGA crowd, including Donald Trump, by the way, and now I read Steve Bannon as well, that Mike Pence was wrong not to essentially throw out the election and simply install Donald Trump in office, there has been a call to amend the Electoral Count Act to make it very clear that the vice president does not have that authority. While Mike Pence himself has come out and made it clear he doesn't have that authority. And he never had that authority. And he's right about that, by the way. And in truth, there's no real requirement to change the Electoral Count Act to make that reality. What's more is, in the 2024 election, the vice president who will be presiding over the count is Kamala Harris. And like her or hate her, the one thing you can say about Kamala Harris is she is a person of integrity who believes in democracy and who will allow the vote to proceed as it should be, much as Al Gore did in 2000 when he was defeated, some might say, by George W. Bush. So what does Susan Collins' proposal do? Well, for one thing, it makes it clear that the vice president does not have the ability to throw out the election, which was always clear in the legislation, frankly. But what's more is it makes it that no longer can a majority vote of the House and the Senate reject the slate of electors that is sent from one of the states. Now, you might think that this is important because you don't want Congress to be able to step in and say, no, we're not accepting this slate of electors. And that's essentially the procedure that Republicans were trying to move forward with when Ted Cruz and Madison Cawthorn registered their objections to certain slates of electors on January 6th. But here's the problem. Ultimately, Congress was not going to go along with them. And to say that both the House and the Senate would support them, especially the Senate with its staggered 6-year terms, and as a result, its insulation from immediate political repercussions, is a little bit of a stretch. What's much easier to imagine, though, are certain states like, say, Texas or Georgia or Arizona, states that have passed this incredibly restrictive anti-voting rights legislation and that have also passed ridiculous gerrymanders, giving Republicans a supermajority in the legislature and in Congress in states that were narrowly won by the Republicans, if at all. Yes, it's easy to imagine that one of those states, or even multiple of those states, would refuse to accept the vote of the people and instead send a slate of electors to Congress that does not reflect the vote of that state's people. In that case, if we pass the legislation that Susan Collins is proposing, frankly, Congress could do nothing about that. If you have that small MAGA crowd who are hardcore in their opposition to democracy, there'd be enough of them to block the required 2/3 vote in at least one of those chambers to reject the slate of electors that does not reflect the will of the people. I still believe in this day and age that along with Democrats, there are still enough Republicans who believe in democracy in Congress that they would vote to reject a ballot of electors that is clearly false. But if we change the voting requirements such that it's 2/3, I think it's fair to say that Congress would have no choice but to accept a fraudulent slate of electors sent by one of the states that is firmly in the control of the MAGA crowd. And if that doesn't give you shivers, then I don't know what will. Well, the sad truth of it, though, is that this is an example of how so-called moderation can actually play a role in helping the right wing gain power. We have to remember that in Nazi Germany, Hitler was elected, and the people who helped him gain power were not those who were vehemently opposed to him. No, they were the moderates who said, oh, we can get along with him. Oh, we can manage him. Oh, we don't want to mess with the system. And frankly, that's exactly what we're seeing now with today's moderates here in the United States. Their refusal to see the real danger that American democracy is in is exactly the kind of complacency that Trump and Steve Bannon and the MAGA crowd are counting on to help them force their way into power in 2024. Again, no matter what the voters say. Hey, if you like that video, you might want to check out this one. It'll give you more ammunition to fight off the MAGA crowd and stand up for our small d and big D democratic values. I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.